Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Career Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. Today, I guess we can call this next guest Alan's brother from another, because you may have heard the episode with Keith Powell, co-creator of the C-CRETS podcast. Well, this is the other Ricky Robinson is the other half of the C-CRETS podcast. And once again, that's C-CRETS podcast. Before we get into the conversation, Alan, what you got going on these days? Because I know we talk about our boys a lot and they're the same age. And we were discussing SATs. Did you get any SAT results for the boys yet?
Oh, we did.
Oh, you sound excited.
So my two sons, Jonah and Lucas, twin boys, they are juniors here in Brooklyn. My son, Lucas, tied me with my SAT score. He got a 1330, and
wow.
He plans to take it again because apparently 1330 isn't what it used to be, and he is aiming higher, so he's going to be taking that again. Meanwhile, my son, Jonah, got a 1580.
Wow.
So he is pretty set. And I don't think he'll be taking it again.
He's got you beat.
Oh, he kicked my ass. Both of them are smarter than me. My daughter probably as well. But Jonah destroyed me. And not that I'm competitive or anything, but yeah. Lucas tied me, and he just took this as a kind of a practice one. He's going to take it again in a couple of months, and Jonah kicked my tush.
Oh, hopefully my wife is not listening. When our 16-year-old, he's 16 now, but when he was in 7th grade, he had the opportunity to take the SAT as a practice, and he scored higher than my wife did. So again, hopefully she's not listening. All right, so let's get into the conversation with Ricky Robinson. He is on the Sick Career Podcast.
I'm excited to I'm going to call him my brother because when I was on his podcast on C-CRETS, he called me that. So I'm excited to have my brother, Ricky Robinson, on the podcast here today on the Sick Podcast. I met Ricky through a friend of a friend who told me, hey, you got to meet this guy, Ricky, because he speaks truth to power. He tells it as it is, and he's a good dude. And I reached out to you. And Keith, your partner in crime with C-CRETS, and really excited to meet you. Before I I have lots to say about you, but before I take all your introductory away, love you to tell the sick crowd here, the Acceleration Nation, Ricky, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you to where you are here today.
Yeah, well, first off, look, Alan, I mean, I'm not saying it because I was playing around with it. Like, you really are my brother, man. Like, I'm telling you, some of these conversations that you and I have are just ridiculous, man. But I really appreciate having an advocate like you to be able to, again, join this mission with us. And our village that we are creating is just crazy, So I appreciate you having me on. But I think, when I think about my career, the best thing about it for me is it just hasn't been easy. There was no blueprint. You think you know what to do. And I always joke about this is I was born in Oklahoma, grew up in Los Angeles, went to college in West Virginia for a couple of years, played football there and ran track, and then ended up coming to the Bay Area to go to school. And I can just tell you, it's when you think about the progression, I'm appreciative that I got the hard knock lessons. But man, I didn't have a family member that was like, hey, you should go get your master's degree. You should go do this. It was, the advice I get, and I laugh about it when I tell even some of my clients. I remember my mom and dad telling me, when you go on an interview, make sure you tell them, hey, did you come in early? That you're a hard worker? you'll stay late and you catch on fast. Like that was the advice, that I ended up getting. And that will only take you so far because, again, you're in there and you're happy, like you're getting a paycheck and whatnot. But as you start hipping up to the game, you start to see that there's other ways or other avenues that you can take. And I would say my career was probably much of that. Like I was doing what I may have seen on TV, or I may have seen someone else do, or maybe a magazine or a book that I read, but I wasn't really guided. So it took me a while to be able to matriculate through my career, to be able to get people leadership roles, to be able to get multi-site responsibilities, and ultimately to be able to get P&L responsibility and then chief level, opportunities. So wasn't easy, man. But like at the end of the day, I was able to do it through, I think, hard work, and focus, I think, and a lot of luck in mentoring and sponsorship. So let me just be honest about that. That it really took some people sitting me down and maybe giving me the game, and then I had to kind of act, towards some of the advice they gave me.
Yeah. And you refer to that a little bit. You got some advice from your folks. Mm-hmm. Did your folks go to university, or were you the first generation college student?
So it was some college. It was some college, So my dad was like a really, really good athlete and ended up going for a minute, but didn't finish, And my mom was smart as I don't know what, but growing up in Oklahoma, it's like we didn't have a lot of family members that went to college. I mean, I can say we have an extremely large family. But out of that extremely large family, we probably had a handful that actually went and finished college, So yeah. I was one of the first ones to actually go, to college and to kind of finish. So, we Keith and I, when we talk on the podcast and with some of our clients, we talk about like to my family, it's like I went pro. It's like I'm the pro athlete of this, that, and the other, because I'm in a league, or I'm in a system that some of them don't know about, but it has been encouraging to some of the younger ones as they're now in college. And they're like, hey, how would I do this? Or how would I do, that? So again, it's, as we're getting the knowledge, we're able to kind of trickle it down and to grow new leaders. But again, didn't really have that, from them. Yeah.
So something I think you said when I was on your podcast, and a common term is like, you need to see it to be it. And how were you able to see the path? So your parents gave you some advice of, hey, just tell them you'll show up on time, you'll be there early, you'll stay late. Which, to your point, that works well to get some jobs, but it's not going to get you the VP of HR at Medtronic, right. A role that you had. So how did you start getting some of those sponsors, advocates, mentors, and like how did you start seeing it? And what are the challenges specifically as a Black dude that may be in the minority, is in the minority in a lot of these roles?
Yeah, no, that's an outstanding question, actually, because, I didn't really know. Like, I don't think I grew up thinking I wanted to be in human resources. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to do anything like that, right? I mean, I thought I was going to be a pro athlete. I thought maybe I'd run track professionally. I thought maybe I'd, be a sportscaster or something like that. I thought I would do that. But as you start to, get engaged in college, and that was it for me. I started to get on the debate team. I was on, in the Black Student Union. I pledged the fraternity. I did all of these things. And then you start to meet people who are doing things that you could probably do also. So I think it was the exposure, to different things that probably gave me the audacity to dream, so to speak, right? And I remember having an internship in college. And again, when you're engaged, about the internships, you got the good GPA, and I'll tell you, when I was in college, I was working hard to get the C. Okay. And I remember, I was studying, and it was some classes that I was doing great in. It was some that I was kind of struggling in. And I remember, one of my counselors was like, hey, have you ever thought about getting a master's degree? And I'm like, a master's? Look, Alan, I told that guy, I said, look, man, I just want to make $50,000 a year and retire. He said, well, what do you think you're going to be able to do to get $50,000? And I ran through these jobs that I thought I could do, but he had me go and do some research and figure out what is it that you can do. My undergraduate degree is in speech and communications. And he was like, what do you think you can do, with that? And, we started doing some research, and that's when I started actually kind of figuring out, he started breaking down for me, what are the things that you like to do? What brings you joy? And I kept talking about uplifting my community. I kept talking about, being able to help people and provide them with skills to be able to overachieve and to do some of those things. And he says, well, what about, that sounds like human relations. That sounds like industrial relations. That sounds like human resources. And I ended up getting an internship well before workplace violence and all of that stuff was, required, and I got an internship doing like workplace violence manuals, like what to look for in disgruntled employees. I was able to go in, unfortunately, after events had already occurred, but you start to ask people like, what, why did this take place? And, all of those things. And I felt like there was an opportunity for us to, and in most cases, the employees were misunderstood. They didn't get their opportunity to say their part, or they weren't treated fairly. And I really thought it was an opportunity for me to be able to change the paradigm to some degree, to make sure that people were getting treated fairly as they were, the same way we treat them when we're trying to recruit them, they get treated like that when they're leaving the organization also. And then I started seeing that HR was the one who actually started to kind of control what the environment looked like. HR was the one that controlled what type of employees you went out there to hire, what programs you started to engage with. And in my mind, it was like, I could run a mini revolution in HR, so that kind of started like my journey. But then I think the bigger part of that was I didn't really see people who looked like me in those roles. So like a lot of the times when I've been in, whether it be corporate America and high school or college, it wasn't a lot of people that looked like me in some of the professor positions or some of the leadership positions. So it was always a goal of mine to try to be in a position of influence so that I could then influence what the overall mindset or the overall population, looked like. And it just ended up being one of those things that I ended up being good at, and ended up being able to see how happy people are when you can kind of talk to them about how to get to the next level in their career, or how to be able to get your market value, when it comes to like getting jobs and whatnot. And at the end of the day, that's what I ended up kind of settling on, and just was good at it, and that's at the end of the day, I never knew how much money people could make doing HR until I found out how much people make in HR. That was one of those culminating events, for me. But I think that's kind of the how it worked. Now, in terms of me getting to the next level, that was a totally different ballgame, right? Because I was like, you work in HR, you figure, hey, I can do my resume, I can speak well, I can do these things. But Alan, I was doing that shit wrong, man. Like I remember my mentor at the time, lady that I used to work for, Lisa Tomlinson, right? Like, love her to death. But she was my first mentor and ultimately ended up being my sponsor. She gave me the realest advice I've ever gotten in my life. She asked me, why aren't you at a director level yet, right? And in most organizations, that when you get to director, that's when the bonus starts to come in. That's when the stock options come in. And I told her, Alan, I said, girl, I don't have the job because I'm Black. I think that's what it is. People are discriminating against me. And I don't even know if that's really what I felt. It was a bit of an excuse. It really was. She looked at my resume and she says, Ricky, I got to be honest with you. Your resume is just horrible. Like it doesn't say people leader. It doesn't say. So she told me that my collateral was whack, is what she told me. And then she asked me, what is my value proposition? That was the first time I'd ever heard somebody say, what is your value proposition? I stuttered my way through that answer. And that's when it dawned on me. She showed me what a really good resume looked like. And she told me how to separate myself from my peer group, and what to do. And that changed the game for me. So it was those early lessons in life, that I got when I was in college. And then this right here, this lesson gave me the secret sauce, so to speak, in terms of how to separate myself from the pile. And since then, it's been over. It's been over.
And you talked about this woman, Lisa, first being a mentor, then being a sponsor or an advocate. Yep. How would you define the difference of those two in your mind?
Yeah. So I think a mentor for me, and I try to make this differentiation all the time. A mentor is someone who can sit you down and give you the truth. They can give you the truth serum. They can say, you're not as good as you think you are, or hey, I would recommend you do this. They can introduce you to people, talk to you about resources. Now, a sponsor is someone who can then advocate for you when you're not in the room. So I mean, she was able to give me assignments when I worked for her, but I'm sure I wasn't on her succession plan. I'm sure she wasn't doing any of that stuff, because there were things about my personality, things about my leadership skills that I needed to work on. So until I could prove that I was worthy or ready to be sponsored, that I was sponsor ready, she wasn't going to do that. And ultimately, she then ended up sponsoring me internal to the organization, but she also ended up sponsoring me externally, as well. So I think that the difference is the mentor will help you navigate through things that you have going on right now to get you sponsor ready. The sponsor is someone who will put you in the boat and take you upstream, to the waters maybe a little calmer. They will put their credibility on the line for you.
Right. They take some investment in you. They take a risk sometimes with either capital or put their neck on the line. Absolutely. And that's what she did for me. Which place was that at?
That was at PepsiCo. PepsiCo, the Pizza Hut family. Yeah.
Okay. Was that before Office Depot?
That was before Office Depot. Yep. That sure was.
So looking at your career, I'm just looking at LinkedIn. So you don't even have the PepsiCo stuff on LinkedIn, which is another big brand name. And you have tons of big brand names on your resume, from Office Depot to Gap to Medtronic.
Yep.
Now you're in the aerospace industry. And over the last 20 years, at least on your LinkedIn profile, you've gone from regional HR director, HR BP, HR business partner, senior HR director, group VP. Now you're chief people officer.
Right.
Do you think, and that's phenomenal trajectory, it looks like 5 or 6 promos in terms of title and responsibility over a 22-year career. So every 3-4 years, you're getting more scope, more responsibility. Do you think that would have happened as quickly if you stayed in one establishment?
No, absolutely not, man. I mean, I think, and unfortunately, when you go to organizations, their memory starts to get selective, right? Because you have to have experience to get the job that you have. But then when you get the job you have, we forget that you had experience before you came here, right? Then we start talking about the things we need to see you do. Yeah, you may have done that elsewhere, but you haven't done it here, right? So what that does is it kind of puts you behind in the pecking order. It also starts to impact your overall, I would say, your wealth that you should be making, right? So if this is a destination company or a job or organization that you want to be in, then great. But if you have aspirations internally, they might start telling you, you know what, in order for you to get to the next level, it's going to take you 3 to 5 years. And that presupposes that there's an opening in 3 to 5 years. All of those, everything has to happen correctly for you to be able to get that. So ultimately, there ends up being 10 boxes you need to check off. Externally, there may only need to be 5 or 6 boxes that you need to check off. And they may say, hey, we're ready to take you right now. Now, there is some responsibility that comes with that. But I think the bigger piece is knowing what your market value is and knowing what you ultimately want to do and being intentional about your time frame that you're looking at, because there is some risk, associated with that. So I think that had I stayed in the same role, that it probably would not have happened for me, because they didn't see me at the same leadership level where I saw myself. It couldn't have been no number of conversations that I would have had me be the chief HR or people officer for the organization. I probably could have rose to some level, but sometimes in order to get to where you need to be, you got to go to where they need that talent, or where there is a need for you to solve an unmet need, so to speak.
Yeah. And you're almost punished when you're in an organization for a few years. They're then they can point out all these things that, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And when you go to another organization, they may not see that, but they almost give you the benefit of the doubt that they're I'm sure this guy, Ricky, he was VP of aortic and peripheral venous. I don't even know what the hell that is, but that's not your title. You're VP of HR in Medtronic in one of their divisions there. And they assume that you can take that and apply it to the entire organization as a chief people officer.
Yeah.
And there's probably not political, you probably deal with other political barriers too, because if you were even in the running at Medtronic for the chief people officer, there are probably other VPs of HRs there that you're competing with and that have different political pull that you may benefit from or not benefit from.
Yeah, no, you're hitting it right on the head. And I think the other part of this, though, is you can't really take it personal at the end of the day. I mean, because let's just say if you're at an organization and some bad stuff happens, let's say Enron, some stuff happens and you're in a leadership role, they're going to associate you as being one of the leaders, as to why the company had its demise. That could take place. I'm not saying it happens every time, but people get on and research the organizations they don't know about them. It could also be that if you stay there too long, then your moment has passed, so you have to kind of think through those things. But I think the last thing for me is I was always taught, hey, get everything that you can out of a role, out of an organization in terms of exposure and, visibility. But again, that's going to help you when you go to the next role and when you go to other roles, because it's going to show that you have learning agility, that you have the ability to go into just about any environment, function, or format, and be able to be successful, there.
Yeah. And it looks like you've had steady progress of going up, over, or out. And like with Medtronic, you were there for 5 years and you were VP of 2 different divisions there. Mm-hmm. I give my clients and people that I talk to the advice of the 2-year rule. In 2 years, you should be going up in terms of promotion, over in terms of like some functional or divisional experience, or if not, you're not getting those opportunities, go out. Yeah. And that's always been like a rule of thumb I've used in my, like probably the last decade of my career. I've kind of thought about that. Do you have any rule of thumb in your mind, or do you get bored, or what has led to, you've moved around a lot, it's worked to your advantage. Mm-hmm. How have you thought about that? Like over the last 20 years or so, and it might've occurred before that at Pepsi and so forth. I can just talk about what I see in your public LinkedIn profile. Yeah.
No, my rule of thumb, honestly, is it really depends. Like, as you said, like that 2-year mark, some things need to really happen in that 2 years. Right. And I'm a proponent of the same that you just spoke about in terms of either you're getting additional stretch opportunities, whether that's you're leading P&L or you're leading a larger team, you're doing some OUS or outside of the US type of an assignment, but again, it's generally that 2 to 4. Some things need to happen in 2 to 4, right? Like if that's not happening in 2 to 4, you are ultimately damaging, your pocketbook, so because at some point the relationship at an organization is a win-win, right? Like you're getting something out of me, and if I'm not moving, that means if I'm in a role for 2 years or more, then I should really know how to do my job, right? I should really be able to get that, because my rule of thumb generally is it takes you 3 to 6 months to figure out what you're supposed to do at a job and what they do. It takes you another 3 to 6 months before you kind of have that aha moment, right? You try to figure out how to add value. So you figure in that next year, it's yours now, right? And some people probably want you to stay another year in the role because they want to make sure that you weren't the beneficiary of good luck, right? That you can weather a storm and whatnot.
Or they want to get more value out of you because they know that you're operating on all cylinders. So let me get another year of Ricky at the same price.
But that's my point, Alan, is like after that 3rd year, what are we doing? Like, if you think about it, look, I got married and man, I messed and dated my wife for a whole bunch of Sundays, right? And I started thinking about that. I need to shit to get off the pot, basically, right? And that's what she was telling me, right? But you start thinking about that. It's the same thing at a job. How long can we date? You know what I'm saying? Before somebody gonna have to put a ring on it. You know what I mean? Like you got to make some commitments. And I think that ultimately no one wants to be in the friend zone, forever. And I think that's really my rule of thumb when it comes to the job. If you're not moving forward, then you are damaging quite a few things at the end of the day. And you start to mess with your psyche. Like, can I really do this? And again, leaving on good terms, all of that stuff. If you do the things the right way, you might be able to come back if you really want to. But ultimately, it's about exploring. It's about being able to reach your full potential and being able to maximize what you ultimately want to do in your career. Sometimes you got to go external to get that.
Yeah. Is there any downside of making these frequent changes every 2 to 3 years, sometimes 6 years at Annixter, but like any regrets on your part, or did you hit any hurdles when you're applying? Because they're like, oh, Ricky's moving around too much.
Nah, and the thing about it is, if done correctly, like I can't tell you the last time I applied for a job. Honestly, people reach out to me about opportunities. So usually when there's something out there, I have 3 or 4 different people hit me at the same time. And if it's not something that I want to talk about or I want to explore, I send them to people within my village, other roles. So I think this is really how it kind of goes. And I'll tell you this, people want to be aligned with folks that get the job done. They want to be aligned with people who are A and B players. They're really not lining up to get the C players, right? Because if you talk yourself into a job and you say, I can do this, look at my receipts, look at my credentials, right? And you can't do it, like that's going to follow you because the community is small. So you have to be able to deliver. So I will say it hasn't hurt me. The thing that probably has probably that I probably give second thought to is I do think you need to trust your gut. You got to make sure that you're not running from, something, or that you're not chasing a title or chasing the money, because at some point, like your BS meter is going to come up and you don't want to end up in a glass cliff type situation where you're in a role and they gave you the time, they give you the money, but there's really no resources or opportunity for you to be able to be successful. I think that movement in my career has taught me to be more intentional about making sure that I am set up for success. Like once you've tasted success, you got to make sure, hey, do we got some draft picks coming? Do we have money to be able to grow this team? What are some of these things? Because being, Black in corporate America, our damn show don't want to be like checking any boxes for people. Hey, we got somebody at the director and above level. We got a Black CPO. I want to make sure that ultimately I have the ability to continue to grow my brand, to increase the breadth and brand of the organizations that I represent, but also that I can continue being that leadership voice and vision for the community. But I think if you move around and you're running from, like, it's just a matter of time before that something that you're running from does kind of catch up with you. So that intentionality has probably served me pretty well.
You mentioned intentionality, but you also mentioned that you haven't interviewed for a role. So a lot of people are coming to you. Mm-hmm. So like if you think about Medtronic, Nortec, Annixter, where you are now, Gap, do they reach out to you?
Absolutely. So it's generally like an executive recruiter, like, again, headhunter. Headhunter, executive recruiter, right? So I haven't paid anyone to look for anything. Like they get paid if they find you something, right? And sometimes they get bonuses if they're finding a diverse candidate, whether that's male, female, whatever it is. That's the intentionality. So let's say if they're getting, and I'm just using general terms because sometimes it's more than this, but let's just say they get 25%, of the total comp or the base salary to be able to land this C-suite, individual. You figure if you're getting 300,000, they're getting 25% of that. That's a win. You can make a niche, for yourself being able to do that. You know what I mean? So I think ultimately I haven't had to look, necessarily for a job. People come to me and ask me if I'm interested. And then we talk about the scope and scale of it. We talk about what is the time frame to be great. We talk about some of those, things. That's generally what happens for me.
Have you ever been intentional about like targeting a company or an organization, or you've kind of just because your network, because your reputation, you're just like fending off a lot of people that are wooing you?
I think it's a little bit of both, for me, right? Like I know based off of me doing this for a while, I know there's environments that I don't want to work in. Like it might be a startup that is still trying to figure out what they want to be, when they grow up. It could be like an industry where it's like I'm dealing with like a bunch of different type of employees, whether it's hourly or warehouse or distribution, where you may have a whole different set of issues or union issues or something like that. You figure it's good to get that when you're young, but when you get a little bit older, you in your career, more experience, you may have graduated from that, and now you're working with a totally different group. So I think me going through my experience and having different jobs and working with different organizations and functions, I know there's some stuff I don't want to do. So in terms of the intentionality, at this stage, I probably am at, organizations that might be pre-IPO, or being at organizations that have a lot of the foundational pieces or the structure and the cadence, in place. I think that's like the intentionality that I tend to look for. And again, do you have a team or a staff that can help you execute against the strategy that you build? Because otherwise, if you go on a roll and you're just doing straight tactical stuff, it's going to burn you out. It's going to set you back, light years, because you'll say to yourself, man, I was doing this shit 10, 15 years ago. I'm doing this again. Or you're trying to encourage or entice leaders to be proactive or to try to do things that, you've already done. So that's some of the intentionality when I do get approached by external organizations or even headhunters or whoever it is. At some point, I am intentional about that. So I think that when people do come to you, they end up coming to you about real stuff, or at least coming to you so that you can promote or put them in contact with people like-minded, like you, so that you can kind of keep the community building.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about why you started C-CRETS, why you and Keith started C-CRETS. And yeah, because that's an interesting story. I'd like our listeners to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So C-CRETS, man, is like, this is our it's our passion project where it doesn't really feel like work. I thought that was cliche-ish when my grandfather would like, make sure you find something that you love doing because it doesn't feel like you're working. When I tell you C-CRETS is not like work for us, because this is something that we believe in. So C-CRETS is basically for us, the way that we, like, even with the spelling of it, it's C-CRETS, right? And then the E represents like stair steps, like you're climbing the corporate ladder, like in your career. So we were sitting down and we probably mentor between the two of us hundreds, of people, right? And we say mentor, like people are coming to us when they have job interviews, trying to prepare, coming to us when they're trying to put presentations together, when they're getting ready to talk about their career development, when they're trying to negotiate their total comp or the salaries. So they're coming to us, and we literally are sitting at Keith's kitchen counter one day, having a drink, just shooting the shit really. And somebody says, you guys, you need to be recording this. And we're like, record it? Man, nobody wants to hear this. And they're like, I want to hear this. Like, literally, we never have a shortage of people who need help, right? So we figured the best way for us to kind of do this at scale, to be able to reach more people, would to be able to come up with a podcast. So we started talking about a podcast. Well, we're talking about knowing how to leave your job and when to leave your job, knowing how to ask for more money, how to negotiate. Well, first off, what is total compensation? What is short-term incentives and long-term incentives? Like all of those types of things. How do you manage, your day job when you got shit at the house happening? We call that outside external static, right? I mean, if you grew up like I did, it was a little chaotic, at the house, right? You got family members running in and out. You got all kinds of stuff going on, but then you have to go to work and put on a different face, right? So we talk in our podcast about our experiences, and we give the receipts in terms of like the statistics, because this is happening, in the world, right? It's not just us going through it. So there's something that this is called. And then we finish off every episode with what we call like our secrets to how to get, to the next level, how to overcome, those obstacles. So it started out with the podcast, and we were like, if a few people listen to this, cool. You know what I mean? So we started this about a year and a half ago. We went from a handful of folks talking about it to over 20,000, listeners and whatnot now. And then we went from the podcast then to executive coaching, from executive coaching to corporate, trainings, from corporate trainings to keynote speaking and, other speaking events. So it's taken off, man, to a level where we had no idea it would get this large. But what it does tell us is that shit keeps happening in corporate America. The disparities keep happening. They keep disrespecting, women and other BIPOC, individuals. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a place for someone to be able to tell the truth and to be able to translate it in such a way where people can disseminate that information, they can digest it, and then they can go and do something, with it. So therein lies, C-CRETS, man.
And I love the straight talk that you guys have on the podcast. You tell it as it is. You call bullshit on the NFL for some of their performative. Like every week, I think you guys have something new about the NFL. Although it's off season now, so I don't think they've done anything this week. No,
but we do stay in the NFL's ass though. Just for the record.
It's a pretty big ass to get up, like the way that they're handling some things there. But talk about like. There's a lot of biases in the system that hold BIPOC women back. There's lots of friction there. It's not going to change. To my vantage point, it hasn't changed as quickly as it should. It's moving in the right direction, but it's so glacially slow. I don't know if you would disagree with that, but assuming that you don't, what do you advise the people that you coach of how to navigate the friction, the biases, the bullshit that exists? Like you're playing on the field, the ref is calling it against you, and you still got to play the game. So
yeah. I mean, this is another good question, and we can, you and I talk offline about some of this stuff. We could talk for hours, on this. But I think ultimately, Alan, we didn't make the rules to the game. Do you know what I mean? Like we didn't invent the rules, right?
And you weren't even invited there when they were drawing them up.
Exactly. Like we didn't do it, so ultimately it's not set up for you. So if you think you can go in here and bust this show up on your own, if you can go ahead and create systematic change on your own, you're probably in the clouds a little bit, right? So you're going to need some help. But so the first thing we tell people is recognize that the game is flawed. Okay. So when you know that the game is flawed, you can walk around here and be as mad as you want to be, or you can hip yourself up to it and start working and playing chess, with it, right? So if you know that they already don't see you as a woman, as being credible, for leadership, if you already know that historically women get paid less than, if you know all of this stuff, you got to start getting your armor on, right? You got to start tightening up your mouthpiece and understanding, number one, what you're worth, but number two, how to ask for what you're worth. And then number three, if you don't get it, you got to be prepared to step. You got to be prepared to go somewhere and claim your blessings or get your respect. And I think those are like the advice. And this is just not about women. Like we can put in all kinds of underrepresented groups, in this equation. And it's the same thing. I think ultimately there might be some different barriers that we have to overcome. But I think that's the main thing that we end up kind of talking to our clients about. I would say tandem to that, as we're talking to corporate America, some of our corporate America clients, at the end of the day, Alan, it really is not that hard. It is not that difficult to hire people. It is not that difficult to promote people. It is not that difficult to pay people what they're worth. So I think ultimately, this is where the BS just starts to get like, this is what we kind of call like that fine print fuckery, right? Where it's like, yeah, Alan, you went to a great school and yeah, you did this, but I'm really going to need to see you do more of this. And at the end of the day, you can kind of keep doing that to play the game, but you got to come with those receipts. How have I impacted my role? How have I impacted my function? How have I impacted my division? And how have I impacted the enterprise or the organization? If you come with that and they're still giving you the runaround, that's when you got to start saying to yourself, let me go ahead and take this show on the road. And I think that making sure that employers know we see you, number one, okay, and letting employers know if you want to change it, this is what you have to do. Ultimately, we got to have women in leadership positions who can make decisions, right? Who can hire people. We have to have BIPOC people who can make decisions, because ultimately we can call it whatever we want, but people, it's the hiring or the recency biases, right? People hire who they're comfortable with. And unfortunately, corporate America is, we know, and depending on what industries you're in, it could be even more white male than anything, right? So it's not amazing, or hard for us to realize that some folks have to do more than others to be able to kind of change the system. But I do think personally, there's some things that we can do, but I think as organizations, there's some things they can do. But at some point, there has to be a meeting or an adjoining, here to agree that we're going to stop doing stuff.
I fundamentally believe that organizations need and can change. Mm-hmm. What I find is they're often not held accountable. They're not looking at the right metrics, and different organizations are not talking to each other. So DEI, the diversity, equality, and inclusion team, might be focused on retention or things of that nature, or a mix of the employee base. But recruiting is focused on hiring people fast and filling mm-hmm. roles quickly. And leadership, unless they are actually held accountable for, they're held accountable for revenue, and they're held accountable for profit. So they don't care who comes in there and sells a widget or services a widgets. So until you have aligned metrics, I think it's all talk. Where have you seen, in your experience, where there have been initiatives that are not just talked about, but actually acted upon, if you've seen it anywhere?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, this is another great question, man. I think that ultimately, one of my real good friends and a leader that I just respect so much, Deborah Yant, at Medtronic, she says, Ricky, you mean well, and you do some great stuff, but if you don't measure something, it's not going to get done. Yeah. What gets measured gets done, right? And I tell you, this is one of the most progressive people, that I've man, this is the first time this woman is telling me some of these things, and she was absolutely right. So as I've done my research, with C-CRETS, and we've worked with other organizations who are trying to implement change, we recognize this got to come from the top, right? If it's not hitting them pockets, Alan, if it's not touching that money at the end of the day, they're not going to be motivated to do it, right? So it'll be flavor of the month, and we can do some performative things, but are they sustainable? So I've seen companies who've actually built this into bonus, credentials. In order to be able to get your bonus, you got to hit certain targets or aspirational goals with respect to women in leadership roles, to ethnically diverse candidates coming into the pool and being hired. I think those are some of the things that I've seen, have worked. I think the other, thing ultimately is when we talk about it coming from the top, we talk about these things, but I do think that if this is an initiative and people can see the sweat equity, they can see that you're actually doing it. They see leaders going to the HBCUs, and recruiting people. They see leaders going to the Hispanically serving institutions or with some of the other, institutions. And they see them bringing people on and not just having an internship program per se, hiring some of those folks. When you see that type of stuff, those are receipts that you have. That's your measurements that you can use. But I think that until we hold people accountable with those measurements, then it'll continue to be talk, and ultimately, how it is back in the day, your parents would threaten you, hey, you better clean this room up or somebody's getting a whooping in here, right? Or you better clean up this room or somebody's not going anywhere. You'd be like, yeah, okay. The minute you hear somebody get that first whooping, you're like, oh shit, they serious. That's what it has to happen. We need to start seeing some leaders be held accountable and lose roles, lose positions. This stuff needs to be documented in that type of way to be able to create sustainable change, and this not just be flavor of the month or conversation of the month.
That would be lovely. The fact that most companies do not have that in place, or those bonuses are a small part of their incentives. What advice do you give people that you work with or discuss, saying that, and I think you talked about it before, that recognize that the game is flawed. So knowing that the game is flawed, what advice do you recommend for people to knowing that they need to be playing chess on this checkerboard table?
Yeah. I think some of the things that we ask people, like, so for example, if you're trying to get promoted, okay, you're trying to get promoted in your job and you've been putting points on the board and it's just not happening. We're intentional about guiding that development conversation. So intentional with, hey, I am a senior manager and I want to be a director within the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. Okay. And ultimately I want to be a senior director or a VP in the next 3 to 5. Right. And that might sound aggressive to them, but you're running through like your experience and you're talking about the things that I have done for the organization and the things that I have worked on to prepare myself for that next role. The $1 million question that we arm our clients with is, what all needs to be true for me to be able to get there, right? Because again, that's the shit to get off the pot moment, right? Like it's like if you're interviewing for a job, and you've gotten all of these things, we tell people to ask this question: is there anything about my experience, my accomplishments, or my background that gives you cause for pause in terms of moving me to the next level of this interview process or me being able to do this job? Those are like those critical moments. That's putting people in the corner. So we are intentional about those things, and it's also when you're interviewing for an organization and you don't see people that look like you on the board, or you don't see representation in terms of gender representation or ethnic diversity, ask that question during the interview. Ask like, hey, is there a plan, for us to increase gender representation? Or ask specifically, what are the percentages, of gender representation at management and above, or ethnically diverse? Because if you know that going into the game, why do you feel like it's going to be different for you? Like, again, so I'm not talking people out of jobs, right? But if you're trying to make that a career, a job is I need to get paid. I need to pay these bills. A career is I'm going to get up in here and I'm going to get into the C-suite. I'm going to get into these levels and I'm going to be able to impact change. Two different things, right? But again, we arm people with the questions, with the tools, with the mouthpiece to be able to get the answers that you want so that you can make an informed livelihood decision.
And I love those two pieces of sick advice there. The first one that you said is like kind of aligned with your leader on what your goals are. And I've had those conversations, and sometimes you get a good response from the leader. Yes, I'll support you here. This will be the plan. And you get some responses. Well, that's kind of an unrealistic plan or something like that. And you're like, okay, shit, this is not the leader I need to work for. Or maybe like either I'm miscalibrated or either they're miscalibrating me. But at least you get that information so that then you can press the eject button if you need to. And the second piece of sick advice that you had was on the interview. Like, I think you said, like, what about my experience or my background or how I represented myself causes you pause for taking me to the next level, right, to the next stage. And I like that direct approach. And yeah, that's some awesome words of wisdom. So we're running low on time. Mm-hmm. I have 2 more questions for you. Oh. The first one is, you left us with tons of sick advice here, but if you had to leave the sick audience with one additional sick trick that will help them accelerate their career, what would it be?
Yeah, I would think it would be intentionality with your aspirations. Know what you want to do, what you want to be when you grow up, and have a time frame associated with that. And you got to stick to it. Like, at the end of the day, it's okay if it's 3 years versus 2 years, but you have to be able to communicate that, and you need to serve yourself well by chasing that path in terms of your aspirations. So that would be the intentionality piece, with making sure you know what you want to be when you grow up and you have the time frame associated with that.
Yeah. Yes. Intentionality, identifying those goals. If you don't know where you're going to go, any path will take you there.
Right.
And the last question I have for you: how can people best follow you, reach out to you? Like, I know you got the C-CRETS podcast, but is that the best way? Are there other ways that people can follow you, reach out to you, and see the amazing work that you've been doing?
Yeah. So we have our community of practice on LinkedIn, and so you can go to us and find us on C-CRETS on the LinkedIn platform. You can reach out to us individually. You can reach out to Ricky Robinson, that's me, or you can reach out to Keith Powell. We will absolutely give back to you. I mean, I think that the best thing for us is just keep continuing to grow this village. So at the end of the day, if you need to get a little bit more money, if you want to figure out what your market value is, give us a call. We'll get you right.
That's awesome, Ricky. Well, thank you so much for the time. Thanks for having me on your podcast. You were a lot more nimble at getting that produced and out there. This one will take a little bit longer, but we will get it out there. I promise you. And yeah, thanks for telling it as it is, giving some sick advice, and really being a brother to me. So I appreciate it, dude.
Hey man, thank you for having me on, man. We're going to keep on making some music. I'm telling you, Alan, we're going to get it all.
Sounds good, buddy.
Well, he's inspired me. I guess I need to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Thanks to Ricky for his sick advice. Thanks to you, the listener, for helping to grow the Sick Career Podcast. Make sure you check in with the website. It's sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK. There's a ton of free resources on the site. That's right, free, absolutely free. Alan, what would you say could be a visitor's best takeaway from the website?
There's so many great things on our website. One of my favorite areas are our blog, where we try to produce a couple of articles a week about the career search, about the bullshit, the hypocrisy, the politics that exist, and more importantly, how you can take advantage of that by understanding what's going on, take ownership of your career, and accelerate your career. So check out our blog. There's good stuff there.
Hypocrisy in politics. I can't believe that. All right. Well, thank you for hanging out for today's episode. For Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba. I know you loved hearing Ricky's story today. You're going to love the next episode.